promise you, though, that we would focus on the ultimate code. In a coding sense, it's the ultimate code. And the ultimate code, of course, is guess who? You. What library, the books in this library are read more often than any other library in the world? The answer is your DNA. You have a master record, and it is unraveled, copied, and rolled up in ways that defy one's imagination. Remember Paul Revere's ride, one if by land, two if by sea. It also has a syntax. The lantern had to be in a particular place. In this case, in the famous poem, it had to be in the Old North Church. See, the most advanced computers could not have broken Paul Revere's code. Why? Because it was a code, not a cipher. It was just arbitrary, but still it had semantics. There are various simplex alphabets. We've talked about those. But it may surprise you to discover there are codes that are error detecting. When you send a byte in a computer, you have an extra bit or so that's called a parity bit, which is always either odd or even, so they can tell if you've dropped a bit in transmission. It's a way of catching mistakes. If you want to add not 1 bit, but 3 bits to that byte, you can make it error correcting. You can make the 3 bits determine the position of the error, and if it's binary, you can obviously reverse it. So there are codes that are error detecting and they're error correcting. So there are also codes that will modify themselves. They're adaptive coding. They'll adapt to the syntax and so forth. I'm not here to explore those codes except to point out one of the most advanced codes known to man is in our DNA. What people overlook about your DNA is your DNA is a 3 out of 4 error-correcting, self-replicating code. And there's probably not one engineer in 1,000 that would know how to even go about designing one of those. And yet, of course, we're taught that it all happened by chance. You and I are just random results of randomness. You know, it's amazing. We found the most insulting God to invent. You know, the ancient pagans worshipped, they attributed their creation to gods of stone or iron or wood, whatever. We've found a more insulting God of all. We attribute it all to randomness. God wasn't even necessary. God is offended by not being worshipped or putting our worship to these false gods. But what's even more insulting is deny that one is even necessary. But anyway, your simplest cell is more complex than the River Rouge plant. It involves, the simplest cell is an entire city with garbage disposal facilities, manufacturing plants, input-output controls, gates, gatemen. It's astonishing, the complexity of the simple cell. But anyway, the DNA code consists of unique assemblies. They selected from over 200 proteins, each involving over 3,000 atoms in 3-dimensional configurations. And it's all defined from an initial alphabet of 20 amino acids. And those 20 amino acids are defined by, in effect, 4 codes. The genetic code, where it's so much in the news, I'm just going to highlight a few aspects of this that you may not be sensitive to from a coding point of view. In your cell, there is your DNA. That is your master record, your master blueprint. To conduct all the things that are going on, they don't endanger that. They make a copy of it for the workers. There's a transcription that makes the RNA, which you can look at like a photocopy of the master blueprint. And then that RNA is translated to create the proteins, which are in effect functional machines. And the Crick dogma, of course, was that you go from the DNA through the RNA, you go downhill. The shocking discovery is that there are reverse retroviruses that will actually not only create disease, it'll go back and alter your master record. And that's a whole other thing. But I wanted to mention something about the DNA being transcribed. The DNA, before it's made in the RNA, something interesting happens. That there are sections of it that are selected out. You realize these are equidistant letter sequences. This is a form of encryption that we find in the Bible and you find in your DNA. These have intrinsic chemical affinity towards one another, so where you have one, you have its mate. And this kind of coding scheme allows you to split it, and it will find its mates. It's an intrinsically self-replicating code. It'll copy itself without error. And that itself is an interesting design feature. It's intrinsically self-replicating. These 3 out of 4 codes will specify any of the 20 amino acids you're going to need for the proteins, plus leave some over for punctuation. You have start controls, stop controls, that kind of thing. So you have an alphabet designed here that is operative. And your messenger RNA, of course, needs to be translated into proteins. So there are machines that emerge out of all of this. that will transfer the RNA, and what it does, it will read that code and decode it. And as it moves along, it knows from the coding what protein it's talking about, and it strings those along to create a protein chain. And that protein chain has characteristics that will cause it to form a three-dimensional machine. We're going to talk about a hemoglobin molecule. That has 574 elements selected from an alphabet of 20. And here's the composite of them. There's elements of all these different amino acids in a specific sequence. And if you don't have that sequence, you have hemoglobinopathy. It's fatal. The formula for the linear arrangements is a factorial thing. Anyway, it's 10 to the 600 with 650 zeros. Just one of them is hemoglobin. The others are hemoglobinopathy. So did this happen by chance? Hardly. Let's take the bacteria with a flagellum. You've probably seen them under microscopes in school. Flagellum has a little tail that propels it through the fluid. If you examine that, there's a place where that little tail, the flagellum, enters the bacteria. And we're going to look at just the place where it enters, and we discover something very interesting. There is what's the equivalent of an electric motor with slip rings, all kinds of over 40 parts, any one of which is missing, it doesn't work. And so this is not something that could have happened. It's something that was very skillfully designed. Anybody that's ever been on a design team knows that designs don't happen. They have to be crafted. See, the real question, the reason the evolutionists can't explain life, they can't explain which came first, the DNA or the proteins. You can't have proteins without the DNA. You can't have the DNA without proteins. It's even deeper than the chicken and egg classic one. It takes protein to construct the DNA. It takes DNA to make the protein. See, they both had to be created at the same time in a consistent system architecture. Which came first, the DVD or the DVD players? They have to come together to create a function that's useful. Same sort of concept. Every engineer would know that. The whole concept of evolution is absurd. But the real you, I can see the real you is software, not hardware. Call it soul, spirit, give it what vocabulary you like. The real you is software, not hardware. The real you has no time dimension. The real you is eternal, whether you like it or not. The dilemma is, where are you going to spend it? Are you going to spend it in the presence of God? Are you qualified to be perfect, to be in His presence? Or will you be denied His presence? You see, you're in this little parenthesis that some people call a boot camp for eternity.